Hello and welcome to the ZTV Sports Report online exclusive NCAA Tournament preview. I'm Hunter Lang alongside Buchtelite Zips beat writer DJ Johnson and host of the ZTV Sports Report, Parker Smith. And let's jump right into the NCAA Tournament. We're going to start with our Akron Zips. They receive a 12 seed in the South region, playing number 5 seed VCU in Michigan. Parker, what do you think about the first round matchup for the Zips?
You know, I think Akron got a little bit of a tough draw. You know, Keith Dambrot even quoted in the post-game press conference after the MAC final that he didn't want to play a team like VCU that, you know, pressed on defense because the Zips obviously have their point guard troubles with the loss of Alex Abreu. But with that being said, Akron can pound the rock inside, and they obviously have an advantage there.
And DJ, how do you feel about the Zips' chances against the Rams?
He touched on a little bit. I think the front court is definitely an advantage. You've seen VCU beat some teams, pretty good teams, by 20-plus points this year, but you've also seen them have some bad losses. So it's how well you handle that pressure, and I think that's really what the game comes down to.
Yeah, recently a 33-point victory for VCU over 6th seed in the East, Butler. But that being said, Parker, I'm going to ask you, what do you think the Zips' chances of advancing are?
If I had to put a percentage on it, I would say maybe around 40. You know, if they still had Abreu, I would maybe even put it at 50 or 60. They might not even have that matchup because they'd probably be seated a little bit higher. But with the current circumstances, I feel like they're obviously the underdog here. But I'll put them at a 40% chance because I don't want to doubt Zeke Marshall.
And DJ, same to you?
I think I'm more optimistic. I think I'm 50-50. I think it's really a toss-up ball game. You're not going to hear that from the national media because they haven't seen this team as much and they know the point guard's gone and so on. But if you look at the matchup, you look at the front court, I think it's really it's a toss-up ball game, and the coaches know each other very well. It's played at a weird time. These guys aren't used to playing at 10 o'clock at night, and it's just what team comes out and reacts better.
Yeah, and Akron, the much better team on the glass, so look for them to work the boards in an effort to win this game. That being said, let's move into the key first-round matchups. We're going to go through region by region, and we'll start in the Midwest. Parker, give me your matchup to watch in the Midwest region.
The Midwest region is a tough region. I'm going to go with Creighton-Cincinnati. You would think that the winner of this game would have a second-round matchup with Duke, who's one of the favorites to win the tournament, and I feel like Creighton could give Duke a good game if they are able to move on. Creighton's a run-and-gun type team. They like to put points on the board. Cincinnati's more of a defensive team, so you can tell that their matchup is going to clash a little bit, and I'm excited to see who comes out of that game.
And a player from Creighton like Doug McDermott is someone who you see shine in a tournament-type setting like this, so someone you should definitely watch out for when you're filling out your bracket. DJ, same to you, Midwest key matchup to watch.
Well, like I said, the Akron-VCU game is a toss-up. I think on the other side of the bracket, the 5-12 game, the Oklahoma State and Oregon, that matchup is a toss-up as well because in a lot of senses, Oregon was underseeded. They got a 12 seed and won their conference tournament, and Oklahoma State's had some losses that they're not unscathed, and I think that game can come down to the wire, and I think it's going to be a good matchup and the highlight of that Midwest in the first round.
Those are both two very athletic teams, and it should be a fun matchup to watch. Moving right along to the South region, Parker, I'm going to ask you again your key matchup to watch.
I got UCLA and Minnesota in this one. Shabazz Muhammad's one of the most talked about players across the nation. Unfortunately, he didn't win the Pac-12 final. They fell to Oregon, who you just touched on, DJ. But I feel like that's a good game to watch because Minnesota's a Big Ten team. They're a tough team. They're going to be gritty. They have the athletic ability to stick with UCLA, so that's what I'm going to be looking at.
And DJ, your region in the South, your matchup in the South?
I think Michigan, South Dakota State. You look at Michigan at the beginning of the year, and they're just a different team now. And you look at South Dakota State, another team I think is kind of underseeded, and a guy we're going to talk about in a little bit that just can make a tremendous impact and compete with Trey Burke at that point guard position. And I think that game could set up well if the Zips do win their technically second round game.
And San Diego State, South Dakota State, a very efficient shooting team, number 1 in the nation from 2, and like you tested to, Nate Wolter's a guard who can play with the likes of Trey Burke and Hardaway Jr. We move on to the West region. Parker, give me your matchup to watch in the West.
Wisconsin and Ole Miss for sure. For me on this one, you got Marshall Henderson, one of the most talked about players, along with Shabazz Muhammad, who I touched on in my last matchup in the nation. He's a shooter. He comes with a lot of fire, and you know he's going to be giving all he has against that tough Wisconsin defense. And then on the other side with Wisconsin, they're a team that I personally have in my Elite Eight. So I know that that's going to be a good game. Both of those teams would definitely pose a problem for, we know the possible Kansas State matchup the 4 seed. So that's the game that I'll be looking at.
And you touched on the fiery Rebel from Ole Miss, Marshall Henderson. You either love him or you hate him. He's a player to watch in this tournament. And much like Doug McDermott from Creighton, who we touched on earlier, these are both players to watch in the tournament, players who can have explosive games in these big game type settings. DJ, your matchup in the West.
Well, first of all, Marshall Henderson just wants attention, and we're giving it to him, whatever. I guess he's a decent player. Okay, whatever. Moving on, Arizona-Belmont I think is a big game. Both teams that have stumbled but also played really well this year at times. And I think that's kind of the constant theme throughout the tournament is no one's perfect. No one has really stuck out this year compared to last year where you saw Kentucky just really all year long kind of be that team that you look to. You don't see that this year, and I think all these matchups kind of present that. But I think if I'm going to point out one, I think Arizona-Belmont, another one that could go either way.
And Belmont being a popular upset pick, as many people think that the 11th-seeded Bruins could upset the 6th-seeded Wildcats. We move on to the East region. Parker, give us your matchup to watch in the East.
I've got another player to watch here in Damon Brooks from Davidson. Davidson's a team that's been known in the past to, make a run as a mid-major, and I feel like they could give Marquette a bit of a challenge. Marquette, sometimes they tend to overlook opponents, and I feel like they could do that here.
Yeah, and Davidson coming in with the nation's longest winning streak currently, and it's definitely something you want to come into March very hot, and that's what the Wildcats of Davidson are doing. DJ, your East matchup to watch.
I'm going Syracuse-Montana. I think Syracuse really slipped up at the end of the year. And that's a potential upset. I think this bracket, the East region will kind of go more form than the other ones, but I think potentially that's something out there. Look out for LIU Brooklyn too.
LIU Brooklyn, I like it. Another matchup in the East to watch could be California UNLV. They played earlier this year at California. UNLV won on a last-second tip-in, so you know that California will be looking for some redemption. We're moving on now, and I'm going to ask you guys some a little gadget matchups almost. I'm going to ask you which team seeded 4th or higher do you think could make a run to the Final Four? And I'm going to start with you, Parker. Who do you think?
I already touched on it a little bit earlier. I'm going to go with Wisconsin here. I feel like this is the weakest section of the bracket, that being the West. I feel like Ohio State has almost a guaranteed path to the Elite Eight, and if Wisconsin is able to upset Gonzaga in a possible matchup in the Sweet 16, then I feel like Wisconsin could give Ohio State a problem because that's 2 teams from the Big Ten. They're obviously familiar with each other, and I don't want to doubt Bo Ryan whenever it comes down to those matchups.
And when you think of teams in the past that were higher seeded and were able to make a run, you initially think of the coaches that were able to do it, and you think of Valvano, and you think of Jim Larinaga leading a George Mason 12-seeded team. And you touched on Wisconsin, and that's another team where you have a coach who's battle-tested, and Bo Ryan is someone who you see advancing in March. DJ, your team seeded 4 or higher who can make a run to the Final Four.
I know it's the toughest region, that being the Midwest, at least in my opinion, but I think the Billikens from St. Louis could make a big impact in this tournament. Their bus got stopped. They had to watch the selection show at Best Buy. That's really been their most pub all year. Kind of a team that's not talked about, not thought about, especially when you have Louisville and Duke and Michigan State in the same bracket as you. But I think if they get the right matchups, this is a team, I have them in my Final Four.
Yeah, St. Louis definitely a team that could make a run. We move right along, and I'm going to ask you, Parker, which number 1 seed do you think has the best chance of being upset during the first weekend, which means they would not make it to the Sweet 16?
I'm going to go with Gonzaga here. I feel like Gonzaga will have a possible matchup with Pittsburgh or Wichita State in the second round. And Pitt has a 7-footer that could play with the big men of Gonzaga and possibly give them problems. I just feel like Gonzaga hasn't really played anybody this year. They have the weakest schedule out of any number 1 seed in the last 20 years. So they're obviously going to be looking for something to prove, but I feel like they might be able to get upset.
And both Pittsburgh and Wichita State, very good rebounding teams that could rebound with the likes of a Gonzaga Bulldog team. DJ, moving to you, number 1 seed you think could be upset during the first weekend?
I'm going with Kansas. I don't think Western Kentucky's going to get them. They don't have quite enough as the 16 seed. But I do think North Carolina, the Roy Williams battle, that could be potentially because UNC has played better towards the end of the year when they went to that smaller lineup. And you have 2 legendary programs, 2 great coaches. Another one that potentially you don't want to see North Carolina in the second round as an 8 seed.
Yeah, and you got to think that's a game that Roy Williams is going to want to get against his old team. being an 8 seed would be a huge upset. We move right along, and I'm going to ask you now, Parker, which region do you think is the toughest as a whole?
Yeah, I think we're all going to agree on this when it comes to the Midwest. You know, from top to bottom, we talked about this before we did this show. They're just strong throughout. They've got great coaches. You know, it doesn't get much better than Patino, Izzo, and Krzyzewski, so I'm going to have to go with the Midwest.
The Midwest is probably the route you'd go just to play, pick another one. I'll go with the West. I think there are some solid teams there. Some teams that have struggled along the way, but have potential. There's at least, I think, 5, 6 teams there that could be in that Final Four.
The East, another region to watch out for. You could see a team like Indiana, a Big 10 power throughout the year, and Miami, Florida, the ACC regular season and tournament champion, the 2 seed in that region, 2 teams that could definitely cut down the nets in Atlanta. We move on, and I'm going to ask you now a player to watch throughout the entire tournament, someone you think could be the MVP, someone who's going to provide a spark to this year's tournament. Parker, who you got?
This is a tough question for me because my answer is going to be Brandon Paul from Illinois. I think he's a standout player, one of the best players in the nation, but I feel like he's going to definitely run into a problem, and that would be the Miami, Florida offense led by Shane Larkin. I feel like Illinois could pose a problem, but I like Miami too much. I'm still going to say that Brandon Paul is my player to watch because I'm not going to say it's impossible that they could upset them, but I just feel like they will fall short to Miami. But I would definitely look out for Brandon Paul. If he only plays 2 games, I guarantee they'll be exciting.
And Shane Larkin, the sophomore point guard from Miami, Florida, playing exceptionally well down the stretch. And Brandon Paul, definitely someone, though, who would be a good matchup for Shane Larkin, so we'd love to see it in the second round. DJ, to you, tournament MVP, tournament player to watch. Who you got?
Well, I think Otto Porter is my tournament MVP because I think Georgetown's going to make a run. The dude's a straight dog, beast. All the words, all the adjectives you can use to describe him. But Nate Walters is the guy I want to see the most for South Dakota State. 22.7 points per game, just about 6 rebounds and 6 assists. I don't think there's another guy in the nation doing that. I think he had 53 in one game this year. Exciting guy, especially going up against Michigan and, a guard-led team there. See how he racks that, because this guy could be a potential, first rounder if he has a big, big tournament.
And real quick, I just wanted to say, if I have to give him tournament MVP, I'd probably go with Victor Oladipo from Indiana because, I don't have Illinois going very far, so he obviously wouldn't win the tournament MVP. I have Indiana in the Final Four in the championship game, so I'll go with my tournament MVP being Victor Oladipo.
A good decision there. And again, touching on Nate Walters, as I was about to say, he is someone who will be odds on a first-round draft pick, which is not something you typically see from a team seeded like South Dakota State is, sitting at a 13 seed, and you got a guy who could go in the first round, so definitely could cause matchup problems for Trey Burke and company.
And he looks like the team manager, but he plays like Kobe. So.
Yes, he does. And, we're going to jump right into the Final Four then. I'm going to get both your brackets here. Parker, give me your Final Four matchups. First, let's get the Midwest and the West matchup.
I got Louisville and Ohio State. I touched on it earlier. I feel like Ohio State has a clear path into at least the Elite Eight with that matchup with Wisconsin. So I'm going to go Louisville, Ohio State there, and I have Louisville coming out on top.
And then we'll continue with your bracket. We'll go to the Southeast matchup. Who you got and who you got winning both of those games then?
I've got Kansas and Indiana. I feel like both of those programs are coming on strong here in the latter part of the year. Indiana, obviously, they were ranked number 1 earlier in the year, and they fell off a little bit. Didn't get that number 1 overall seed that they were hoping for, but still, regardless, they've beaten a lot of good teams this year, a lot of great teams this year, that being. So I feel like Indiana, Kansas, that'll be another great game, and I've got Indiana against Louisville in the championship game.
And then, why don't we just finish it on out? Indiana, Louisville, national championship, who you got?
I got the Hoosiers. They're going to come out on top. They've got possibly the number 1 overall pick in Cody Zeller. They've got the defensive stud in Victor Oladipo. They've got the shooters on the outside. I just feel like there's no doubt that this team's at least going to make a run deep into the tournament. And, once you get into that Final Four 8, it's pretty much just to pick them.
And, again, we touched on coaches being so important, and you got another great coach in Indiana. And the 4 coaches you had in your Final Four, all incredible: Bill Self, Rick Pitino, Thad Matta, and Tom Crean. So we hope we can see matchups like that. And, let's move to the other side. DJ, we'll move into your bracket, your Midwest and West matchup.
I got St. Louis, the Best Buy Billikens, coming to the Final Four. I think they get out of that bracket. I think those other teams might knock each other off. Duke and Michigan State, they're going to have to play each other. So looking at that, if those two teams make it, I think that sets it up well for St. Louis. I got Gonzaga. I think they only have 2 losses. I know that you can rag on their schedule, but they've lost 2 games. That's what it comes down to, and that's pretty remarkable considering you've won 31. And then if I flip it to the other side, I got Georgetown coming out of the South. I think just too much. They played in a grueling conference. I think they know how to win, and they got the star power. And then coming out of the East, I think Indiana picks it up. I know they've struggled, but the Big Ten, another conference that you just get beat up in, I think the bracket sets up very nice for them, and that is my Final Four.
Well then, obviously we're going to move right along. Who you got playing for the national title and winning?
I have Gonzaga in Georgetown, and I think the Hoyas take it 62-58. I'll give you the score. I think they're the best team, and I think they do win the national championship, in my opinion. But like I said, it's an open field. If you predict the national championship and the Final Four correct, props to you, because it's not an easy thing to do.
For the ZTV Sports Report, alongside DJ Johnson and Parker Smith, I'm Hunter Lang. Thanks for watching.